Welcome back to Askewed Reviews, and we have another movie request today, and it is for the 1988 film The Blob. Here is your trivia question for today. What movie is being shown at the movie theater in the film? The answer will be at the end of this video. So our film starts off in the small, quaint town of Arborville, California. During the night, a meteor has crash landed near the forest, and a homeless man has decided to go poke it with a stick. Unfortunately for this man, the ooze that comes out of that meteor decides to cover his hand completely. However, on a fortunate note, the local bad boy, Brian Flagg, finds the man and helps get him to the hospital. The two of them end up running into Meg and Paul, who are out on a date, but are able to help get the man into their car, and all four of them travel off towards the hospital. While waiting around for the old man's diagnosis, something terrible begins to happen. The ooze that was attached to the old man begins to eat away at him and then attacks Paul. From there, it heads off to the town where it wreaks havoc and tries to devour all of the townsfolk. At one point, some people from the government do actually show up, but it doesn't seem like they're there to help. So, will Meg and Brian be able to work together and convince the townsfolk of what's actually happening, or will the blob just overtake everything? This film is directed by Chuck Russell. Russell even makes a brief cameo in the scene where the blob is at the movie theater, as he is one of the audience members. This film is, of course, a remake of the original 1958 movie, also called The Blob. Frank Darabont was one of the co writers for the script. He also happens to be a huge Stephen King fan, especially of his book, The Stand. In fact, there's quite a few comparisons you can make between that book and this film. For instance, both of them have a government working on a super flu or viral warfare. One of the main characters in the film is Brian Flagg, while in the book there is a very well known character named Randall Flagg. There's also in this movie a homeless man named the Can Man, and in the book there's a character named the Trash Can Man, who is very devoted to Flagg, and of course the homeless man in this film keeps showing up during scenes with Brian Flagg. The plan from the beginning for this version of the Blob was to essentially have it be an inside out stomach, using its stomach acid to burn and melt things, and I feel that they did a wonderfully beautiful job of representing that in this film. In case you were wondering how they created the blob in this film, it was primarily made of methocel, which is both very slippery and actually a thickening ingredient for milkshakes. Originally, there were talks of making the blob green for this film, but they decided to stick with the pinkish reddish hue so that it would be more like the original. Also, speaking of the pink slime, there was actually a scene that got cut out that showed the blob crawling towards the town. Now, that cut scene would actually appear in the movie Ghostbusters 2 as a part of the slime attacking New York. So there was actually a full body cast made of Donovan Leach Jr., but for the scene where the blob is overtaking him, it was actually him at first, and they were just pulling stuff over his face. Now, the thing was is they didn't tell Shawnee Smith that it wasn't the fake one at first, so her shocked look on her face is because she didn't realize that they were actually going to have Donovan underneath that. So the way that they were able to accomplish the phone booth implosion sequence is they actually had a 3-foot phone booth model, an articulated doll that looked like the actress, and they shot air mortars that blasted the glass inward. The giant pile of frozen pieces of blob at the end of the movie were actually all rock salt that was just dyed purple. Something that really impressed me in this film is that they virtually used no CGI. The only CGI they claim to have used was for the little sparkle and shine on the frozen fragments at the end of the film. Apparently, the reason they didn't use it for the blob is because CGI was a new technology at the time and they were worried it just wouldn't look right. Director Chuck Russell states that both the characters Brian and Scott are based off of kids that he knew in high school. Russell also claims that the whole sequence with the pharmacist and the condoms actually happened to a friend of his in high school. Also, when speaking about high school, here's something else that's interesting. Donovan Leach Jr. and Shawnee Smith actually went to Donovan's senior prom at Hollywood High together well before this movie was ever created. Before Kevin Dillon, the role of Brian Flagg was originally offered to Chad McQueen, as his father Steve McQueen had been in the original The Blob film, but he didn't want to follow in his father's footsteps, so he turned down the role. Terry Hatcher was apparently another potential actress for the role of Meg. Now, this film would actually be Shawnee Smith's first horror film that she was in, but definitely not her last, as you probably know her very well as Amanda from the Saw series. Del Close plays the character of Reverend Meeker in this film, but he was also in the sequel to the original film called Beware the Blob from 1972 as a character called Hobo Wearing Eye Patch. The partially dissolved soldier that is laying next to Shawnee Smith here was performed by a triple amputee stuntman named Noble Craig. He actually lost both legs and an arm and an eye while he was in Vietnam. Both Erica Elenick and Julie McCullough would either before or after this film appear in Playboy as playmates. One last thing you may or may not know is this remake actually released exactly 30 years after the first film. So when it comes to the film The Blob, I honestly can't speak highly enough about it. I love the story, the effects in my opinion are absolutely amazing, and in general, it's just a really fun watch. So I'm going to give this movie a 5 out of 5. And of course, if you can't get enough of this movie, other movies I do recommend the original version, the sequel to the original, Beware the Blob, The Stuff, and even Cloverfield. Now, as for the trivia question from the beginning of this episode, what movie is being shown at the movie theater in the film? So, the film they're showing at the movie theater is called Garden Tool Massacre, and it is, of course, supposed to be a parody of both of the highly successful slasher series, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Friday the 13th. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews, and if there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.